gratia plena.
Good evening. Can anyone hear me? Oh, yes, okay, I think that is working. Now, just bear with, because there's some kind of technical difficulty going on at the moment, and I'm not entirely certain what it is. My guest says he's with me, but he's not, because I can't see him. And I can't seem to be hearing, and I'm not hearing myself in real time, which is a little bit odd. So if you've just joined us, tonight is In Conversation With. And at the moment, I'm on my own. So I'm just checking with my guest to see. And fair play, it is his first time on this new platform, so he may have misunderstood something. So we'll see now if I can get him. Okay. Right. Okay. Well, this is a little strange now because for some reason I can't hear myself, which is very odd. And yet, it all seems to be working otherwise. Ah, there he is. Ah, good evening, Father.
Good evening.
Oh, good. Oh, I can hear you. That's fine. Excellent, super. Right, then we can start.
Yeah.
So, if you've just joined us, you're watching now In Conversation With, and as you can see, I'm in conversation with Father Raphael from Houston in Texas. Now, for some reason, I don't know why, but I can't hear myself in real time. So I don't know what difference that's going to make. But actually, Father, can you hear me in real time?
I believe I can.
Yeah. So
Okay.
there's not a delay.
No, however, there is a bit of an echo that's feeding back. Yes.
Okay, I think I might know what that is. If I stop that, indeed, if I come out of that altogether. Now, has the echo stopped? Does that seem to have worked?
There's still that echo in the back. Yes.
Is there? What does it sound like to our audience? No, it sounds fine. Sounds good. Okay. All right then. So sorry about that. So I'm a little bit discombobulated now because for some reason my sound is still not right at my end, but I can hear you fine.
Very good. Yes, it's just sort of repeating 2 or 3 second delay, but
right.
I can work with it.
Yeah, how strange. Okay, well, never mind. Anyway, so let's begin. So tonight, as I keep saying, I am in conversation tonight with Father Raphael. As I say, he's there all the way from Houston in Texas, and I'm here in Brighton in the United Kingdom. So technology, as often as we don't always understand it, nevertheless, is an amazing thing, and is enabling us to have this conversation today. So, Father Raphael, introduce yourself a little bit to us, would you?
Good. I'm going to do my best because, as I say, I can hear you speaking 2 or 3 seconds ago as I'm speaking now. So let's see how well this goes. I'm in Houston, Texas. I'm an old Roman priest working in the Texas Medical Center. And Your Grace has been very accommodating tonight to have me on during my lunch hour, and hopefully not too late for you.
Yes, it is just early evening here, and lunchtime with you. So, now tell us a little bit about yourself. So not about your ministry, as it were, but just a little bit about your personal self.
Right. It's this is a very interesting mixture of sound that I'm getting, because I'm getting are you experiencing the same thing? No. Okay. Well,
No,
I'm
no, I
getting
can hear you
twice.
perfectly.
Okay. I'm just wondering why I can hear you twice. So everyone can
Are you
see and hear
watching? Are
you.
you watching the broadcast at all?
I am.
That could be it. That could be it. If you mute the
Okay.
broadcast.
So I'll just go to your stream then
Yeah.
and get off the broadcast.
Oh no, stay on the broadcast. No, well, sorry. Well, the screen I'm talking to you on now, leave that on. But if you're watching the broadcast, i.e., on another screen, then just mute that or turn that off.
That has taken care of the problem. My
That has. Oh,
apologies.
that's all
And
right.
for your listening audience, not all old Roman priests are quite as old and techno in techno peasantry, live in techno peasantry as I do. So your question, Your Grace, was again.
Sorry, yes. So, yes, just tell us something a little bit about yourself. Not your ministry as just yet, but just something about your background, because you know where you come from or where you studied.
Yes.
A
So
sort of précis of your life till now.
Right. Well, at the risk of losing a lot of your viewers there, no, I was born in Barranquilla in Colombia. I was raised in the the Roman Catholic Church, where I'm from a family of immigrants. We came to the United States, lived in various parts of the United States, and after college, it was quite early in my life that I felt, I believed I had a call to the priesthood, but never really pursued it until after college. And so I began my studies in Hawaii. I was at the now now defunct St. Stephen's Seminary. I got there the last 2 years before it closed, and came back to the mainland, as we say here in the States, and took an MDiv from Perkins School of Theology at Southern Methodist University. Then studied in Austin, Texas, which just a couple of hours south of Dallas, where the Southern Methodist University was, to become an Anglican, an Episcopal priest here in the States, we call it. Then after becoming an Episcopal priest, I took an interest in canon law, being that there was not a great emphasis in canon law in the Episcopal Church, and if there was, I couldn't reconcile how it wasn't being in any way used or applied or adhered to or venerated in the way that I, in my own tradition, understood canon law to canon law's role in the church. So I started studying canon law of the Eastern churches. You know, the Episcopal Church has a very similar ecclesiology with the Orthodox and Eastern Catholic churches, and so that particular canon law was something I was interested in, and so I have served various parishes, curacies, and now I serve a small mission, and I earn my daily bread as a hospital and hospice chaplain in the Texas Medical Center.
Super, smashing, thank you. Very interesting. Now, I don't know if you saw the interview with Brother Juniper last Thursday, but oh no, I've got to. I thought I'd set it up. let's just get that sorted now.
I did catch parts of it, yes.
Now, of course, what I bless him, what I did to Brother Juniper was go through his Facebook profile, and find a couple of things to ask him questions about. Now, I tried the same tactic with yourself, but there wasn't very much for me to pick up on really, except this one picture here.
Ah, yes.
Now this represents a very recent event and celebration for your family, doesn't it?
Indeed, yes. Just on your first point, I just warn your viewers. It's a great boring void that one might experience in trying to find something interesting, as your Grace tried to. But that to me is quite interesting, and that's why I posted it. That's my son Channing, who graduated with his Juris Doctor last Thursday. Of course, it was a virtual graduation, and the picture you see there is just when he and I went down to the College of Law to pick up his tam and tassel, and we thought we were going to dress him up and have a nice picture outside, and it began to pour, and so we thought we'd better get this picture as quickly as possible. But yes, that's my son, who is very interested in the aspects of law having to do with constitutional law, and he's just freshly minted, so he's in Los Angeles now celebrating, and
excellent.
Yes. Thank you very much for showing that.
No. That's and was his interest in the law in any way sparked by your interest in canon law?
Very much so. And he avoided canon law as much as he could, having had a father as a canonist. Yes, but no, he's always been in that way very keen in terms of the having that gift of the Spirit of right judgment and keen sort of insight, and he's yes, and so he's doing quite well. He's had a couple of internships that we believe one of which will turn into a very good career track for him.
Excellent.
Yes, thank you, Your Grace.
And you must be very proud.
I am of him. Very grateful to the Lord. That's something that takes a great deal of sacrifice on everyone's part, particularly his part. The discipline, just the faith, day by day, depending on God for everything that's needed. And now we are looking toward the future and hoping that this this career track that he's chosen will help him pay for all of that student debt that that we are famous for here in the United States.
Yeah. No, I mean it's a phenomenon now over here. Since I think it's 1996, they scrapped free tertiary education or undergraduate education, so that now our young people too are saddled with, I think, an average of £35,000 worth of debt when they graduate.
Right, so 50,000 or so, whereas here in the States, that's that number is higher. And interestingly, we've never had that that free higher education, that free college opportunity, but that's something that's being it's being discussed very seriously and put forward on political platforms. Very interesting, however, that it's the other way around. The UK has scrapped it, and we're just considering that, hey, this might be something that could help our future.
It was surprisingly something that a Labour government did as well.
Interesting. Yes.
So I remember in I think it was in 1996, being in Blackpool, and I think I can't remember where we were in Blackpool. It might have been the famous ballroom. I can't remember, but it was a student union conference. And the Labour students who were in the ascendancy, of course, Tony Blair having just become Prime Minister and everything,
right?
And the student union, the national conference, was invited to vote to agree the new policy of the scrapping of grants and the broadening and introduction of student loans. And I was gobsmacked at the time, and still to this day, I've never understood how it was, socialist government and socialist students that voted to scrap free education. To this day, I still don't understand that one. And especially because it was a great leveler. Because it did mean that if people from poorer backgrounds got the grades, they could go to university, and they didn't have the worry about having to pay tuition fees and so on and so forth. It's it still baffles me to this day.
Very interesting. Yes.
So now something else I did find on the internet, though, so not from your Facebook presence, but from the internet, a article in the Houston Chronicle. Caring for patients in hospice is a chance to offer unconditional, non-judgmental love.
Yes, right.
And written there by yourself. And you began you began the article with a beautiful quote from St. John of the Cross. In the evening of our life, we shall be judged on love alone.
Yes.
And it was a very interesting article. Perhaps you might share, and totally apposite, of course, for end of life and hospice care. But perhaps you might just like to tell us about that approach of on love alone.
Yes. Well, how long is this show, Your Grace? I'm just kidding. No, that article, that was this last November. We celebrate here in the States what we call National Hospice Month. And for the last 10 Novembers, I've tried to submit articles all over in the paper here locally, but then in other publications, just to raise awareness of hospice care and of hospice care within a hospital or assisted living or any other kind of setting. That particular one, the one you mentioned, starting with the quote from San Juan de la Cruz there, it came at a particular time in the hospice and in this country's medical governmental compensation moment. There was a great it happened actually. There was a great move to scrap a good deal of the compensation that hospitals and hospices receive for providing end-of-life care. And it was done in such a surgical way that one could see that behind it, not only were there politics, but there was a great funneling of profit to a different direction rather than where it had been before, because all of these, except for the one that I work for in Houston, actually two that I worked for, are for-profit entities, hospitals and hospices. And in any case, so that particular article, I tried to highlight the importance of the of hospice and end-of-life care in the entirety of the delivery system of medicine in the States, and then kind of give some anecdotes about experiences with patients, with physicians, and sort of couch it all in spiritual terms, which, we here in the States, we're very aware that the hospice movement began in Great Britain, and that were it not for the model, if you will, of the way in which hospice care was delivered in Great Britain, we would not have the system we have now. Nobody cares about any of that, of course, Your Grace. Today, we're so far removed from all of that. But you know how we old Romans are. We like to kind of keep things connected to the roots and the truth. And so I was trying to do that in that article. Yes. Let me just say a little bit about the medical center itself.
Oh, please do.
The Texas Medical Center it's actually the largest medical city in the world. It's modeled off of the Greek, the mythological cities of medicine, you know, that that one would read about. But it's the vision of a couple of very wealthy magnates from the late 19th century, who were really just wanting to, after having amassed a fortune, it would have been $335 million, the equivalent thereof today. They wanted to create something for the betterment of mankind. But one of them, after a whirlwind trip around the world, came back with this beautiful vision of, you know, this medical city of Greek mythology, education, research, patient care, everything in one place. And so it is a small town where 115 to 120,000 people work every day. They come in there to work, and it's renowned for its research. And so just walking down the halls and in between hospitals, I can get a great education overhearing doctors talking about the treatments that they're using, developing, things that aren't working on this COVID-19 pandemic that we're experiencing. So it's just a dynamic, very wonderfully energized and intense place to work, and the chaplaincy and the chaplain corps there have, I believe, this mm, beautifully privileged um, experience of being around many of whom are people of deep faith, these physicians and researchers, uh, as we care for spiritually, and we try not to divorce that, from their from the general care they receive, as we care for the patients in during this time, during this pandemic.
So have you had to use PPE while while you've been engaged in your daily ministry there?
Yes, indeed, Your Grace. So PPE works. PPE is the reason that I am able to speak with Your Grace right now. It's the reason that the cases, the daily case numbers, are not at least 50 to 75% higher among what are termed first responders or medical professionals or ancillary people in patient care. Uh, and the lack of PPE is the reason that we do have uh, the numbers that we have. And just to give you an example, here in Texas, here in the States, we don't have regulations concerning the uh, the PPE and the ways in which people should respond in this crisis. We have guidelines. We do have an agency called the Centers for Disease Control, whose role it is to establish these guidelines, but they seem to be in competition with another political entity, namely the White House, to kind of see which is the has the greater influence. In any case, we don't have regulations, and so outside of the hospitals, although we still see people observing guidelines of social distancing, of wearing masks, all of these sorts of things, um, we still see people not doing that, and we see the numbers going up. Last week was the first week that the local archdiocese uh, allowed churches once again to offer public celebrations of worship. It was a disaster in terms of its numbers, you know, because the guidelines, of course, are a facility cannot have more than 25% of its capacity filled up at any one time. There must be social distancing. There must be masks. Speaking about churches, they can't receive offerings. If you're going to give an offering, it must be in a certain place, and they can't receive communion on the tongue. Well, these are so guidelines, right? In any case, after 1 week of this phased reopening, there was a 27% spike in the number of new COVID-19 cases reported in 1 week. The reason that they opened was because this was beginning to trend downward, and it's just been a disaster in that sense. So that's my long answer to your PPE question. I'll try
No, it's
your short
very
PPE.
interesting. No, it's very interesting, and thank you for talking about the wider context as well. I mean, we're at the moment as yet without any relaxation concerning uh, corporate worship. So our churches and chapels everywhere are still in lockdown, and there's variance of opinion as to whether that's right or wrong. Some are more vociferously now suggesting that perhaps it would be okay to have the churches open, but with social distancing and with sanitizing regimes, etc. Others are of the opinion that maybe we ought to wait and see if there is a second wave, see how the relaxation works in other areas, so that we've got a few more retail shops, etc. now allowed to open. I mean, I have to say I do understand the sort of irony that some people have pointed out, that you can go to a supermarket or you can go to a retail outlet, and people are not very good at observing the social distancing, but you can't go to a church, which, generally speaking, is quite a large space, and where you could easily keep your distance from other people without too much effort. But I'm conscious myself, as something of a historian. I'm conscious of myself of the lesson that we ought to have learned from the Spanish flu epidemic in or after the First World War.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sort of, as I've said with Father Thomas on Unscripted, I'm sort of ambivalent. I see the arguments both ways, but to my mind, because our infection rate here has not dropped, if anything has slightly increased, especially since the lockdown restrictions were a little lifted. I'm sort of waiting for that. I'm sort of waiting for the death results to come in
Right.
from this past week or so. But even then, I really am sort of sitting on the fence. Very unlike me.
Yes, well, but see that
So,
is, I believe, also one of it's part of, as far as in my opinion, the charism that old Roman Catholicism maintains and brings with it. The fact is that you are able to say, as the Lord Archbishop of Chelsea and of the Metropolitan of Europe, that you don't know. We don't. We really don't. And we can only see, observe the data, observe the effects in society on the patients, on people, and then from there respond using all of our goodwill and faith and all the science and everything that we can bring to this. We have a situation where, well, I wake up each morning, Your Grace, to an email, and it's not, a lovely prayer. It is a page of statistics from the medical center, which tells me how many new patients were admitted, how many have recovered, how many from what demographic. It has the statistics, the science, the numbers that can, for me, help me in my day, as opposed to what I was doing yesterday. And so, but none of that can be denied. And all of it has a sense of really requiring the acceptance of the fact that this is new and that we just don't know. And if we, we have, as Your Grace mentioned, the studies, the literature from 100 years ago, certainly, but we don't have the experience. We and things have changed in a way that it requires a different response. So being honest in and being able to say, we just don't. What we do know, we can follow, we can address, but we don't know how and why these certain spikes come up. We have a clue, but we honestly, we don't know. We don't know when the next wave will hit in what areas. We have a clue because of models, but we honestly can't say, it's going to be November 3rd, the second week of Advent. We can't say that. We can expect and we can prepare. One of the most striking statistics for me was not just demographics, but the I call it the demographics of vocation. In other words, among which populations is the number of new cases most active, where it's least active, and where there are least amount of cases. This is true from the beginning to as of this morning. Is among health professionals. And that is because we all, I look like, a 1960s robot with all of my PPE as I go in to pray or give a viaticum to someone. It is just a number that's astonishing. It's the lowest number among those who don't have access to PPE, who are because of poverty or because of a social location or customs not observing social distancing. The rate of new cases continues just to climb. So these are things that we can say we know. Then we also say these are things that we don't know.
Sure. Can I ask over here? They've noticed particularly a prevalence of infection among the BAME community, so the Black and Asian and minority ethnic population. Is that the same where you are? Does it seem to be more rather than Caucasian, but more ethnic background people who are contracting the infection?
It is absolutely the same.
And do you think that is that just because of the social dynamic and demographic, or do you think it's genealogical as well?
No, not at all. This is what we believe, that it's the social dynamic, the social location, the lack of access and education, but the lack of access to proper hand sanitizing measures, masks, social distancing. People in I live in my mission. This canonry here exists in one of the lowest income parts of Houston, and I have neighbors who in a 2,000 square foot space. There can be 12 and 13 people living, and that's just the extended families or your room boarders and everything. So it's the social location of the minority populations, which then tend to be poor because of some other very long-standing social dynamics in our country that causes that rate to be so high among the minority communities. As of the first month in Houston, 80% of the COVID deaths, of which as of this morning there have been 230, 80% of them were African American. Okay, 20% were Latinx. So this was during the first month. So I bounced that number off of a couple of medical students, and they, yes, that accounts for it. I mean, that's all the patients that we've seen. So yes, that again, the long answer to your short question. A disposition, a risk, genealogically, no, I that's not something that is in any of the literature or anything that we've seen. No, you probably know that in Russia right now, the rates of the disease are climbing rapidly, and we know how many poor people there are in Russia. So, and very very few African Americans or Latinx people.
Yeah. Interesting. And of course, I mean, over here, we can't help but notice that the vast majority of our NHS staff are BME. So nurses, doctors, porters, cleaners, ancillary staff, you name it. Our NHS has always been, as it were, backfilled and supported by immigrants who have, originally came over from other places of the empire,
Right.
and then and subsequently are the people who will take those jobs, without wanting to sort of generalize or demonize too much, but generally speaking, the vast majority of apparently native people here are not interested in cleaning jobs or portering jobs or etc. So it's interesting, demographically, re our NHS, that the vast majority of frontline workers are BME, and of course, subsequently, that's reflected in our figures of the demographic of people infected. And in London, of course, which is a huge, very high concentration of ethnic population, immigrant population, and genealogically mixed race, British and former colonial, etc. Very high density of BME in London, and London is has been the epicenter really of the COVID experience here in the UK.
Mm-hmm.
Just out of interest, what is the population of Houston?
So Houston is, we're in a census year here, and there's a great controversy because the undocumented community in the United States is 15 million, and they live in great fear and oppression right now under under the new laws of immigration and things. But so Houston officially has a population of 5 million. It's
Wow.
the third largest Latinx city in the United States. New York, Los Angeles, and Houston. It has it has 2.4 million Latinx people out of 5 million.
Out of 5 million.
Yes, so it's just pushing, upper 40% of the population of the city.
Wow.
1.7 million are in Houston Catholic. 1.7 million people. 1.2 million of them are Latinx, ranging, from old Romans to new Romans, for lack of a better word, and probably most falling in the middle as used, as we say here, old, new, and used. But so yes, it's a port city. It is cosmopolitan. It is, as of 2018, the most diverse city in the United States. It overtook New York City as the most diverse city in the United States in 2018. Yes, so that demographic, it got me thinking when you mentioned London's population, of course, which is so diverse and ethnically in a metropolitan sense, and then the spiritual needs of all those patients, COVID patients, are going to range from Anglicanism to Sikh and everywhere in between. It's the same here in Houston.
So what percentage of the population at the moment then, or so of that 5 million, what percentage of the population has been infected? Do you know so far?
Well, so in Houston proper, as of this morning, I'm not going to pull the email up, but we've had, I should know that number. I can tell you how many deaths we've had. We've had in Houston proper 230 as of this morning, and
See, that's
we've
an interesting number.
Yes.
Because here, Brighton,
Mm-hmm.
which has a population of about 250,000,
Mm-hmm.
we've had 100 deaths. Well, just over 100.
That really is interesting.
So
It
that's
really
an
is.
interesting comparison.
Yes, yes. I mean, we've had over 10,500 cases reported, and we've had, I think, the last number I remember is close to 300 recovered patients, diagnosed, treated, and recovered. So, but this is, I believe, due to the very aggressive and very regimented observation of the guidelines that are put out privately. As I say, we don't have regulations that come down as in stone, but being the medical center of the world, if you will, we know that these are the things that work, and so it's a very interesting number. Yes.
Yeah. I think that excuse me. I think for those anybody who's watching locally here will find that a very interesting statistic by comparison. So in Houston, Texas, out of a
Yes.
population of 5 million,
Yes.
about 234 cases
Deaths. Yes.
deaths
Yes.
so far. And here in Brighton, out of a population of about 250,000, 100 cases.
Yes. Interesting. Yes.
So
we were
gone.
we were, of course, the one of the first major metropolitan areas to go on lockdown, if you will. Um, we're still in that state. There is what's called a phased reopening going on statewide, but here in Houston, it's not it's not a regulation, so it's just a guideline. So the mayor, the city council, the judges, and the county judge are very shall we say adamant about the very slow pace of this returning to normalcy based on daily measurements within the population. So
yeah, it's pretty much a similar approach and attitude that the city council here have taken. The government has announced, as it were, phase reopening, but our city council here are quite reserved in following and applying that gradual reopening.
yes,
So that I mean, for example, here we're a seaside town, a very popular destination for day trippers and for
right.
holidaymakers, and of course we've had superb weather since the lockdown began, which is typical.
Wow.
And it's been a constant battle every weekend for the
I'm
council and
sure.
for the police to police visitors from outside the city, as well as allowing inhabitants within the city some freedom, because
Yes.
a lot of our accommodation in the city is flats, apartment buildings and blocks where people don't have outside space or very limited outside space. So there has been a concern here by the council and the police to allow a certain measure of relaxation to enable citizens to use the parks and use
Wow.
the seafront.
Yes.
But at the same time, there's been this constant battle and this constant sending out of messages by the city council saying to people from elsewhere in the country and in the county, don't come here, stay away, stay away.
And of course, that is has got to be the base of the economy, if not a
Yeah,
substantial part of it.
big time, big
It
time.
is where Anthony Hopkins and Emma Thomas sat at the end, the last scene of Remains of the Day, right? And clapped
That's
as
right.
the sun. Okay, very good. I'm getting my bearings.
Yeah,
One day
that's
I
right.
hope to visit. But so we have a similar situation in Houston, just less than an hour south. We're right on the Gulf of Mexico, a little town called Galveston.
Hmm.
This archdiocese was originally called the Diocese of Galveston, and then the Diocese of Galveston Houston,
Mm.
and now it's the Archdiocese of Galveston Houston. But Galveston was the original. It's the port of Galveston, and so the economy there has depends on, as you say, tourism and just visiting and all that brings with it.
Yeah.
So it suffered a great deal, and we have probably because there's a branch of the medical center's educational entity in Galveston. There's a great shuttling of patients that comes from Galveston to the medical center, uh, and so it's so intertwined, so connected. Right now there's a great polemic here in the States. Uh, the battle, if you will, between private profit and loss
Hmm.
and public health and safety. And there's this great tension of, well, we just need to get our businesses back going and open up our churches. A lot of what we here in the States very mm, shall I say, respectfully call evangelicals. They're basically fundamentalists. But so, they really want to get their churches back, and some of them have. And the rate of infection has gone up in those very churches, in those very communities. Restaurants and businesses, of course, anything having to do with service that has that profit margin that's that they depend on and that's daily. They want to get that open, and then there's the public health and safety sector that's saying, if we do this too soon, there won't be any people to serve because they're all minority people, who are working in those industries, and so
Yeah.
it's a very interesting time we're living in, and then the the patients themselves who we see as chaplains, uh, their lives, their stories, their needs uh, are just microcosms of all of this rhetoric and all of these considerations there in a hospital bed. Just a fascinating uh, and very profound um, concentration, of this moment there
Yeah. Yeah.
in the hospital bed. Uh,
Now, just talking about the hospital bed scenario. So, is it the case that, for example, when you're obviously when you're ministering last viaticum, people are presumed to be on the way out, as it were, and so of course you're head to toe in PPE. and the nursing staff and doctors are as well. Uh, what is the access like for family or friends to visit people dying from the virus? Is it
Yeah,
possible or?
right. Since the beginning of lockdown, pardon me, there has been a policy. This is a regulation because it's the private hospitals and things. No visitation whatsoever of any patient in any condition, COVID related or not. And so it's not just the COVID patients who can enter a hospital on a Wednesday night and then not see or even hear from, in many cases, their loved ones for weeks.
Wow.
And also in many hundreds of cases, they uh, never see them again. So uh, the isolation and the contact isolation is very, very strict. Uh, uh, the ways in which the hospitals have uh, uh, reconfigured and adapted the wards and the different floors according to the need for not spreading this virus has just for me been so incredible. But what we've done very from the beginning is we because you can't tell who a person is when they come in with all that PPE, and so we've put pictures of ourselves on the front of our gowns, um, and then of course plastic over that, so that the patient can at least see what we look like, and we hope to have a picture of us smiling, of course. But
Yeah.
yeah, so that is just one. The isolation that a person experiences uh, in hospital, in any case, is really a profound thing that chaplaincy is very attuned to.
Yeah.
But in
Yeah.
this case, the isolation, the particular quality of it is accompanied with so much fear of the unknown. As I said, they can ask doctors things, and the doctors will be very honest. This is what we do know. This is what we don't know. Um, and their loss of connection, not only to their family, but if they're people of faith, we value as people of faith the connection to our communities.
Yeah.
And so the isolation it has a quality to it that is just so oppressive and profound on that person. I've found that isolation and that solitude that a patient is forced to experience um, can lead to a very transformative experience, a very transformative acceptance, if they're people of faith, um, an acceptance that is, um, Lord, my will, which I'm used to having done and doing all my life, is not being done, and it won't be. I can see this. Your will is, and that's it. Period. And so that realm of acceptive, transformative acceptance um, really provides a place for chaplaincy to be able to care, pardon me, in a way that in a context that is much more profound than the regular hospital context.
Sure. I mean, it's as you know, I mean, it's a constant theme of my preaching and my teaching is around will and
Yes,
around the denial of one's own will and the acceptance of God's will. And so what
yes,
you're saying is that irrespective of anything, when somebody is in isolation and particularly in the present situation and circumstances where
Hmm.
they really cannot change or affect anything for themselves. That finally that resignation can come to then an acceptance,
Yes, right.
and an openness to God's will, and to God's presence in their life.
Yes, yes.
Yeah,
And at the very least, Your Grace, to just mystery, just to the acceptance of mystery. Of this is something that I don't have control of. This is something that is not my will. What is it? It's something that's not fully revealed to me or anyone else around me, obviously. And what is it? And so this openness to mystery then is another door, if you will, another portal for the chaplain to to help and come alongside in terms of the person's faith and of their connectedness to God.
yeah,
Um, yeah, because they're accepting it, uh, but accepting one's suffering doesn't eliminate the negativity of it, right?
yeah,
So yes, and so but it does provide this tone in of spirit that acknowledges everything, acknowledges the suffering, acknowledges the mystery, acknowledges the doubt, acceptance that can be transformative.
yeah.
So it's yeah the experience of caring for patients, which I know Father Tom in Chicago and Father Bishop Kelly as well can
Yeah.
probably attest to, has just this different quality, this different character during this time. We need to get some really good minds on on how to express it, so that perhaps in the future we can help others. Yes,
I
this
mean, because I would say that there is generally anyway, this potential. Um, we so often we hear these stories of people who, suffered serious injuries, almost fatalistic injuries, but recovered. But in that process,
hmm
um, uh, went through a resignation, went through an acceptance, went through an openness, went through a transformative experience.
yes,
Really sort of reevaluating their appreciation and perspective on life, um, and the way that they'd lived life till then, and then the way that they're going to live life going forward. So I recognise that in some of what you're saying, but what you're saying is it's sort of heightened and more
yes,
intense. It's intensified
yes.
in this particular COVID and strictly enforced lockdown scenario
It
for
really
patients.
is. It really
Yeah,
is, Your Grace. Yes. Whereas you say, generally speaking, this can happen here and there, and one sees it, and it's few and far between, but it's so pronounced and so uh, beautiful, if you will, that it's highlighted by our our collective Christian histories and but here it's almost every patient, because it's just beginning with the intractable sort of suffering that they are going through. Uh, to them, intractable. Why did this happen to me? Kind of, or how did I catch this? But in any case, it's set on a course because of that isolation, the newness, the unknown, the fear. It's set on that course, and it. You mentioned how we in our tradition have those beautiful examples of transformative suffering, of redemptive suffering, we call it, right? But we always have known from the beginning, Christians, old Romans, that we've asked the question, what can separate us from the love of God? And this then is sort of the outcome for so many of this. Getting back to the article there, of this dark night, of Saint John's dark night of the soul, where suffering is happening. We're not denying it. In not denying it, we are accepting it. In accepting it, we are opening ourselves to mystery. In opening ourselves to mystery, then we are able then perhaps to receive insight and even revelation, if you will.
I mean,
And so,
it's
yes,
that whole irony, isn't it, of the Dark Night of the Soul, that St. John of the Cross and St. Teresa of Avila and others have spoken about, and it's that irony of being at the one moment feeling completely alone and completely helpless but at the same time it's in that moment one is most likely or to experience the nearness of God.
amen. Very beautifully said. It's the children of Israel in the desert who alone knew the God then by his revelation to them as their deliverer, as their healer. This person in this condition, at the very lowest and darkest point, knows God then as the highest and the greatest point of light in her or his life. The person with the least amount of consolation that they've ever had in their life. Ornery doctors, bothered nurses, non-present chaplains, and just everything, and no comfort whatsoever. They then know the Holy Spirit as comforter. Their life may not have been exemplary to them, and they feel, well, this is really great. Now, I've not accomplished. I've made a mess of my life, and now I've got this, and I'm going to die this way. And then Jesus comes as a redeemer to them, and that's exactly right. This is in that deepest and darkest night is when that most profound and light-filled revelation of God comes to us. He comes to us. So that this is part of what the chaplaincy has sort of spun off to, which I love, of course, because I can sit around with the chaplains and some of the people after shift, and we can talk about this. But whereas before, it wasn't centered around this obvious thing.
Yeah,
So
yeah, yeah.
yes.
And so have you found then as well at the moment a greater appreciation from other medical professionals about this phenomena that patients are experiencing, and about the relevance and the necessity of the chaplaincy team being there to be able to address and to respond to it?
No. Uh, in general, no. And I can say this because I've worked with doctors, for years and years. They're scientists. They're women and men of data and of science. And so they now are engaged in that. They certainly accept that, yes, the Chaplaincy is a very integral part of what they do. They know when to call in the chaplain. But they tend to, after events, check all the data, put it all in the right place, and then sort of come to conclusions after that. Right now, they're focused on how wildly things have changed day to day in patient care, in new therapies, combinations of drugs. Right now, they're focused on that. But in general, of course, they certainly appreciate the chaplaincy, the chaplain care. But right now, they're very focused.
Sure. But they must have an appreciation for it in the terms of the personal. For the benefit of the patients, to have that point of contact who is someone other than a nurse or a doctor, and somebody with whom they can have non-medical conversations.
Yes.
And because there is. I mean, actually, I'm not convinced of what I'm saying here, but I'd like to think there was a greater appreciation generally for a greater understanding of the physiology, of the whole physiology of the person, and not just what is immediately perceptible and empirically verifiable, but there's so much about the body we don't still know, we don't still quite understand, and the connection between emotions and feelings and concepts and thinking and thought, and how that all mixes together is still in many ways something of a mystery.
Yes.
Even to neuroscientists, etc. They still haven't yet been quite. They still can't quite yet explain. Where thought comes from.
Right. No, you're so right. You're so right. I was being facetious, of course, Your Grace. I guess I hold them to a higher standard, being who they are. But you're right that there is a greater today emphasis upon that. What of course in science the doctors have to call the mind-body connection. Spirituality, we call it, and its effect on the well-being of the human being, and also on the actual immune response of the human being. So there is a great deal of that. So as I say, I was just being, I was talking about my guys and my ladies, right? Yes.
That's all right.
Yes. One of whom I should say very very quickly, parenthetically, just to tell you the caliber of the people in the medical center. One who is an internist, but he's a pulmonologist, I suppose, by speciality, as you might say, in Britain there. He, in 1999, was awakened at 4 a.m. in the morning by a man with an Italian accent who mentioned a friend of the doctor's, saying, you were recommended to us. We are in Rome. The Holy Father, Pope John Paul II, has this condition, and would you consider coming? Yes. Within, of course, 24 hours, he was there. He treated the Pope. I guess it was one of his first, one of John Paul's first major bouts with the respiratory decline that eventually took his life. But he said that this was just an incredible experience because the Vatican staff of doctors were attentive to his every diagnosis and every word, and they asked what he needed, and he said within hours they made the papal chambers an intensive care ward. They brought everything that he needed, and he said it was state of the art. And within 6 days, all of this recovery was made possible through these therapies, new therapies that he was working on in terms of combinations of therapies and drugs and things. But so these are the kind, this is the caliber of folks, and that's why I always rib them, about at every opportunity. Let's put it that way. Yeah.
There's that much to be said about banter and camaraderie, and especially in tight and difficult
Yes.
situations and scenarios.
Essential. Yes.
It's how teams are built and how they stay together. Yeah, absolutely. And of course, with that anecdote about JP2 and the Vatican staff and getting everything that was he was recommending, etc.
Mm.
There's always been, I always say this about Catholicism, we've always been very pragmatic.
Mm.
We've always been practically minded, and in other words, it's like I always say to people, it's about that. It's the harmony and the balance between the spirit and the flesh, not over reliance on either one, as it were, but
Yes.
finding our
Amen.
harmonious balance between the two. That is the purpose and the object, and the benefit of Christian living.
You're so right. I neglected to mention that what he said to the man on the phone at the end of the conversation was, I'm Jewish, don't you? So, but yes, we know you're Jewish. That doesn't make any difference. You are assigned this. That doesn't work into the equation in any way. Because we are practical. We are assigned. The scientific method was invented in the Holy Catholic Church, as you know, Your Grace. So yeah, there is no conflict between the truths of science and the truths of our faith.
No, that's
right. I mean, not for us, because I did stumble upon a web page the other day of traditional Catholics who call themselves flat Earth Catholics. So yeah. That aside, yes.
Yes, well, you see, and that's of course, is generally our contention now these days that of the spectrum of Catholicism, we old Romans are still the we're still there in the centre of where the balance is. Yeah, absolutely.
Yes.
Well, we're well over our usual time. So no, and it's been great. It's been great listening to you. Thank you very much for sharing. It's been a great insight into the impact of COVID-19 elsewhere, and quite a startling. I'm still thinking about that percentage of infection rate between Brighton and Houston.
Yes.
That's really quite something. That's very interesting indeed, and I shall probably go off now and have a closer look at our own local stats, just to see how bad the situation really is.
Yes. Well, yes. Well, thank you very much for having me, Your Grace. It's been a pleasure. May I and all the rest of us who are listening, may we have your blessing before we go.
Yes, certainly, absolutely. Let us pray. May the peace of God, which passeth all understanding, keep your hearts and minds in the knowledge and love of God and of his Son, Jesus Christ our Lord. And may the blessing of God Almighty, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit be upon you and remain with you always. Amen.
Amen. Thank you
God
again.
Bless you all. Thank you, Father Raphael, for joining us.
Thank you.
Tomorrow evening is Friday night, and that is Friday Night Live. I know Father Raphael is an avid viewer of that.
Big fan.
Now I've got to confess that tomorrow's show, I'm not quite sure how well tomorrow's show is going to. Well, you see, the trouble is that YouTube are very strict on the showing of other people's work and stuff. So it's all this copyright stuff. So I've got to box clever.
Yes.
And I've got to be careful. So I haven't had a strike yet or anything, but one could be imminent if I'm not careful. So there's Friday night live is tomorrow, of course, from 6 o'clock after the Regina Caeli. A light-hearted look at life and at the end of the week and the beginning of the weekend, and then our 2 unscripted shows on Saturday and Sunday, again from 6 o'clock. Saturday night discussing pious devotions and religious artifacts, and then on Sunday our current affairs program. So thank you all for watching. We hope this has been interesting for you, and I hope it was as interesting for you as it was for me. And please keep watching every night, 6 o'clock. We're always here. Meanwhile, stay safe, stay clean, be good to one another. And remember always that God loves you. God bless. Take care.
Amen.